Hi, I'm Don Dawson. Welcome to our program. Today we'll raise some questions, latch onto some answers, and lower the boom on accidents.
We lift and move things every day. We can handle most objects by ourselves without the use of machines. But sometimes arm strength just isn't enough. Often it takes more power to get the big jobs done. That's why we use cranes. You might find one type of crane right in your own backyard. Hang a rope over a tree limb and you can make the simplest kind of crane, a pulley. But working with industrial cranes requires a lot more knowledge and much more attention than a pulley does. Because of the hazards associated with working with cranes, OSHA has had crane safety regulations in force for some time. But until recently, they hadn't been changed for almost 40 years. However, with the crane-related accidents in the construction industry increasing rapidly, in August of 2010, OSHA updated a number of provisions in the construction portions of the regulations to be more in tune with today's sophisticated equipment and operating environments. The crane regulations cover a number of areas, including ground conditions, assembly and disassembly, work around power lines, and inspections. They also address signaling, fall protection, work area control, operator certification, qualifications for signal persons and maintenance personnel, and training. While you should be familiar with all of the provisions of the crane regulations that affect you and the people that you work with, some of the recent changes in the regulations are particularly notable. Before a crane is positioned or assembled, it must be verified that the ground conditions are firm, drained, and graded so that the crane can set up safely. Crane assembly, disassembly, and setup must be overseen by personnel who are competent and qualified. There are new restrictions as to how far a crane must be from power lines when it is being assembled, operating, or traveling. Generally, it must be 20 feet away at all times, but this can vary depending on the amount of current going through the lines. By November 10, 2014, all crane operators must be certified by an accredited testing organization, a licensed government agency, or through a qualified employer program. Signal persons must be qualified by either a third-party qualified evaluator or their employer's own qualified evaluator, based on the criteria OSHA has specified in the regulation. And maintenance employees can only operate a crane as they work on it if they're familiar with how that specific type of crane functions, or they're directly supervised by a qualified or certified crane operator.
There are many types of cranes, and the regulations apply to most of them. Although they share similarities, these cranes also have important differences. Let's take a closer look.
Most industrial cranes fall into three basic categories: overhead cranes, jib cranes, and boom cranes. Overhead cranes are attached to support platforms or the walls of buildings. These cranes move along bridges to carry their loads, usually in a straight line. Unlike other cranes, they really don't have much range of motion. Jib cranes, such as the wall crane, have an arm which suspends a hoist rope, block, and hook and can pivot to position loads. It's important to remember that a jib crane's arm can't be adjusted for angle. It's locked into a horizontal position. But the crane's hoist block may be able to move along the jib arm. Boom cranes, such as truck or tower cranes, are the most complicated group. While we don't cover tower cranes in this program, much of what we're discussing, including the OSHA crane regulations, applies to them as well. Boom cranes are similar to jib cranes in that they also have a hoist rope and a hook, both of which hang from an arm. However, where a jib arm is locked into a horizontal position, a boom arm can be adjusted for angle and length. There are many variables to take into account when you're dealing with boom cranes. In fact, operators usually require special training in order to use these cranes.
Boom cranes, jib cranes, and tower cranes are all powerful and complicated machines. So it is important to take the time to get to know them before working with them.
The first thing that you should do before working with a crane is to locate the standard safety devices that all cranes have. There are two types: general safety devices and operational safety devices. General safety devices are found inside a crane's cab and often include bells and warning lights. If sensors detect a problem, the devices will sound off or blink. Other common general safety devices include horns and warning tags. They're used to alert coworkers when the crane is moving or if it's not functioning properly and should not be used. Operational safety devices such as overload indicators, emergency stop buttons, and limit switches monitor or control the handling capability of a crane. For example, a limit switch cuts off the power when a crane reaches the end of its range of movement. After locating the safety devices, it's important to inspect the crane thoroughly. You can often prevent accidents by finding small problems before they become major malfunctions and cause your crane to break down. Start by checking the crane's fluid levels to see if they're within acceptable limits. Next, try out the controls to see if the crane is ready for operation. Also, test the brakes to make sure they're functioning properly. Then, start the crane up. By listening for unusual noises, you can often track down leaks or other potentially serious problems. While you're inspecting the crane, pay special attention to the hook. Hooks are used to attach the load to the hoist rope. Never use a hook with a broken or bent safety latch on it. The sling could slip off the hook and damage the load. Be on the lookout for stretched or twisted hooks as well. If a hook opening is stretched 15% or more from its original size or twisted more than 10 degrees, it should be replaced. One more thing. Always check the weight limits on any crane before you use it.
Once you have completed a general inspection, you need to focus on the particular type of crane that you're working with.
Let's start with the overhead crane. Remember, this type of crane rides on a bridge or rail. These bridges have end stops that prevent cranes from running off the rails and bumpers that reduce the impact when the crane reaches the end of the line. Since these parts are prone to wear and tear, you should make sure that the stops and bumpers are secure before using the crane. When you're working with a jib crane, make sure you know the jib arm's range of motion. Without this knowledge, you could get your hands or fingers caught in the equipment. Check the arm for bent supports or misalignment as well. This should also be done periodically while you're using the crane. You should also check the hoist brake. Make sure it can hold and lower the crane's load safely. Most boom crane accidents are the result of mistakes made during setup. By using the load chart, making sure that the crane is level, and knowing the capacity of the slings that you're using, you can prevent a lot of problems. A boom crane is equipped with legs called outriggers, which are used to position and level the crane. Start by extending the outriggers and placing them on solid ground. Wood or metal plates are often used to ensure secure footing. After extending the outriggers, check the level inside the cab to see if the crane is parallel with the ground. If it isn't, and you try to make a lift, it could cause severe damage to the crane itself. An unbalanced crane can also tip over and damage equipment or injure a coworker. So take the time to level the crane with the outriggers. Another important step to take when setting up a boom crane for a lift is to consult the crane's load chart. The load chart lists the weight capacities for the crane at various boom angles and lengths. You can find the load chart by looking for the copy that is permanently attached to the crane, or by asking your supervisor, who usually has a copy available. When you're calculating the weight of the load, remember to include all lifting accessories, such as the rigging, the block, and the hook. Make sure you find the right boom length and angle that's needed for lifting all of this weight. If you take the time to understand the load chart before you begin, you will be well on your way to a safe lift.
Once you have set up the crane that you're going to use and are familiar with the way that it works, you are ready to rig the load.
The first step in rigging a load is to make sure that nothing is in the way of the crane. Clear away boxes, tools, or any materials that may be lying around. Once the area is clear, position the crane directly over the load so that the hoist rope hangs straight down. You must lift the load straight up and down. If you try to lift a load diagonally, you could damage the crane. Next, attach the load. Be sure to put the sling on the hook correctly. A hook is designed to support loads at its center, so never put the sling on the tip of the hook. If you do, the weight could stretch and weaken it.
Once you have rigged and attached the load, make sure that everyone you're working with understands standard hand signals.
To show that you want to hoist a load, lift your arm, point up, and move your index finger in a small horizontal circle. To indicate that you want to lower a load, point your arm downward, extend your index finger, and move it in a small horizontal circle. To signal that you want to stop the crane, point your arm out to the side, face your palm to the ground, then move your arm back and forth horizontally. To call for an emergency stop, point both of your arms out to the side with palms down and move your arms horizontally. If you're using a boom crane, there are two other hand signals that everyone should know. To signal that you want to raise the boom, extend your arm out to the side, then point your thumb up. To show that you want to lower the boom, extend your arm out to the side and point your thumb down.
Once everyone knows how to use the hand signals, you're ready to hoist the load.
As you begin the lift, pay close attention to the angle of the load. This is the angle between the load and level ground. The best way to lift is with the load parallel to level ground. If the angle of the load exceeds 10 degrees, the load could fall out of the sling, causing damage to equipment or even injuring a coworker. Once you have a load balanced and have hoisted it into the air, you will probably need to travel with it. Be sure to move at low speeds. This lets you see where you're going and at the same time keep an eye on the load. When traveling, it's a good idea to stop periodically to make sure the load is stable. Be sure to avoid sudden stops and starts that could unbalance the load. Always watch where you're going. You should never pass a load over someone or let anyone walk underneath it. If the load fell, it could seriously injure them. You have the greatest control of the load when a tag line is used. A tag line is a piece of rope that is attached to the hoist block or the load itself. Putting tension on the tag line can move the load smoothly and safely to its new location. When you get the load to its destination or other stopping point, be sure to land it. A suspended load is an accident waiting to happen. Someone could walk or drive into the load, or it could fall. As you put it down, lower the load slowly, stopping a few inches from the landing point to make sure everything is secure. Then lower it the rest of the way. Once the load has been landed, the slings should be removed and put back where they belong. This will prevent them from snagging on other objects when the crane starts traveling again. You should also raise the hoist block high enough so that no one will hit their head or run into it with another piece of equipment.
By moving the things that take a lot of power to lift, cranes help make our lives easier. But if they aren't used properly, they can cause damage, injury, even death. So knowing how to lift, move, and land a load will not only help us do our jobs more effectively, it will help to keep us safe as well. Let's review.
Know the OSHA crane regulations and how they affect you and your coworkers. Familiarize yourself with a specific type of crane that you are using. Always inspect a crane before working with it. Make sure that you and your coworkers know proper hand signals. Know the weight capacity of the crane before rigging your load. Always position the crane directly over the load. And when lifting, check the angle of the load to make sure that it's level.
Safety can sometimes seem like a burden, but by learning to use cranes properly, that load can be lifted off of our shoulders, and we will all be safe every day.